and we're going to do the first drill down on the session that we did with Catherine earlier. So if you were attending the session earlier, there's a little bit of repetition, but it's mostly just so that we can get into a lower level of detail. And I would encourage you to ask questions, right? This session is meant to be for you, and so we'd love to hear where you have a question, where you have something you agree with, where you have something you disagree with. I mean, that sort of feedback is super helpful, especially as we are in the process of writing the book, right? Your feedback, your use cases, your examples are always super, super helpful. All right, I think I've overused this particular quote. The point being is, we're jumping into the design phase. We're beginning with sort of the vision of where we want to go. Importantly, and this is the as we've discussed, it's the first one. It looks broad across the entire sort of vision, right? It really helps you validate alignment with the business ultimately, and then at the very end of this, but only at the end, we will narrow down to really focus on sort of MVP.
Principles, right? So we define business requirements, we set up priorities, and then as soon as possible, we push our users and we push ourselves to go live with the first release. So our promise is that this first release should happen in days, in weeks, but obviously not in months, right? If you're doing a no-code development cycle and your team tells you that the next release will happen 3 or 4 months from this time, this means that you're not following the methodology. This means that this larger business use case should be decomposed, and we're going to talk about that. The second point is that we are focusing on rapidly building MVP and getting this ongoing feedback from our end users, and finally, we constantly iterate. You heard already our mantra, everyday delivery. And everyday delivery mantra helps us to always remember that in an ideal world, we need to deploy value to our end users on a daily basis. Imagine the world when they wake up in the morning and they see some additional capabilities that they haven't seen a day before, right? And it's kind of constantly elevating scenario. And with that scenario in mind, obviously your end users will start treating software release or software upgrade is like something exciting, something that doesn't change the way they operate, because we're going small pieces, we're going small iterations, we're not kind of boiling the ocean with massive upgrade.
Andy, the last comment along the bottom was an important question that came up in the prior session. For those of you who weren't there, a question in the audience was asked, who is this Playbook targeted for? And it's a really important one, right? And it's targeted at both the business stakeholder and the practitioners in the business to really help be a practical guide for them as they are thinking about no-code applications and the process, right? And so this does take a different sort of point of view than what you would expect if you were a pro dev or someone sort of classically trained in IT, right? This is not meant to replace the existing sort of massive amounts of writing and software development and development methodologies, but this does have a point of view that is targeted at more business-oriented stakeholders and how they think about their own sort of no-code journey.
Yeah, and we will now go deeper into our design phase. And I have a question, and we probably want to give 2 stickers for that. So you guys focus. So what's the first stage of the design phase? How do you call it? Come on. Say it again. Case two. It's very close.
Can you give half a sticker?
Business use case, right? 2 stickers, and 1 sticker for the lady because it was close. So we have business use case, options analysis, design and prototyping, and project assignment. It's important to remember that because, again, as you go and try to adopt this capability and this methodology it's super important that you understand the sequence and you really kind of get it inside of you, so you know what's next.
All right, let's dive in. These are the 4 stages. We're going to drill into each, so I'm not going to read the text, but this is the introduction to stage 1. So let's dive in. Okay, now just as a side note, continuing sort of the business use case, even the term. We actually had some discussion when we were getting going about, is it the right term? A lot of people hear use cases and you immediately jump down into more technical use cases, system use cases, application requirements, right? It's got a large body of sort of practice out there. What we were really focused on, though, is if you think about this pyramid here, the highest level of the requirement sort of pyramid chain, right? Which is really focusing on the business objectives, the business goals of your stakeholder, right? And really understanding then, supporting that, what is the process that will enable that to be delivered. We are not at this stage getting down into functional user requirements where you would classically sort of capture user stories if you're an agile shop, or capturing lots of detailed inputs, outputs, sequence diagrams. Those are a detail that will come later. We are also, and I may have commented on this before, we're not really getting into sort of the technical and system requirements. These are important, and there's a bunch of important things that you need to depend on in terms of things like service levels, performance, quality. But importantly, that is really done once when you're selecting your no-code platform, right? And you have to make sure that the platform is correctly installed, validated, deployed. But the abstraction you get with a no-code platform is you typically don't have to worry about those on an application level, right? Because the platform itself will take care of those. So the goal here is the top of the pyramid, right? That's really this phase.
And then the question we have for you, so ideally, like when you collect those business requirements, how many people do you want to represent kind of this business users, right? So what is a structure of a team, or what would be your expectation? With how many people you would like to have this conversation? Stakeholder? Is it like one person? Yeah. And what about your thought?
There might be many people involved, but I think we should work with one on this.
And why is that?
We want them to make those early decisions.
Correct. Absolutely. So what we've learned, and again, we're trying to talk about decomposed business use cases. Don't think about them as something large and something like super significant, right? But the less stakeholders we have in the process, the easier this discussion gets. Because if you get just way too many opinions, way too many expectations, and they represent different sides of logical levels, like someone will be talking on non-functional system requirements because we got some people from that background. Someone will be talking about functional and user requirements, like specific fields that you need to get. This conversation will not be super productive. But if you put it into like a right logical level, and if you're dealing with less stakeholders, ideally one stakeholder, but who combines understanding of workflow and understanding of the right expectations, your process will flow much quicker. It doesn't mean that we need to disregard the end users. It doesn't mean that it will be, one person defines and then we'll kind of roll it out. If you like it or if you don't like it, it doesn't matter because we have agreed that with the stakeholder. Of course, on the next stages, we do have needed steps to incorporate the end user feedback and get a larger team involved. But at this stage, the less people you have, the more success and the easier for you is to move through those stages. Make sense?
And so just to illustrate the point of what kind of information do we want the stakeholder to provide, let's go to the next slide. I think I may use the example, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So if you have too many people articulating their view on the success of the project, right, you're going to get lots of different opinions. And so, these are some principles to really focus on, and it illustrates why it's better to have a single stakeholder if possible, right? Because they can talk about the value and the goals that they are setting for the project, and that they're ultimately held accountable for, right? They are probably, the one that will be either held, as having a successful project or a failed project, depending on how well this application delivers, right? So it has to be their view, right? And so that goes back to a single stakeholder is better. If you find that you're getting into the details, the fields, objects, really getting into the how, then you've gone into too much detail. And so we'll do a quick example exercise in a slide that will sort of compare and contrast. But stay at a high enough level that also will make it easier for your single stakeholder to be the person that can articulate that view. And again, they should probably, in most cases, be the process owner. Right? If you think about who owns the definition of that process inside the company, the one who understands the workflow best or that process best is likely the stakeholder that is going to be responsible for this application. So now I think we're going to do a real life example. Actually, before we do that, this is, so if you were to write down like a template, this is sort of a high-level view of what that template would look like. Obviously, the owner is clearly identified. You know who the stakeholder is. They've articulated the highest-level business process. Could be more than one process, but it probably shouldn't be 20. Your scope has probably ballooned, and it may get too large if it's too wide. In fact, it's better that you try to decompose and get narrower in terms of the process steps or the use cases that are really essential. We talked about this before. Consistency of the process is important. You may identify a process that at first you think it's consistent and there's a single version, but as you start really understanding the way the business is implementing that by region, by department, that there are a lot of inconsistencies. And so as part of this phase, understanding and at least identifying at a high level where there is some inconsistency or variability is important. And the last is super important. What is the success criteria for this initiative? How do you know that it met expectations? Again, that loops back to the owner of the business process in most cases.
And it's super important to coach your stakeholder and explain to them what would be your expectations. Let me probably switch to a real-life example. And we will be referring to this example because it was one of the first apps that we internally created for ourselves on the territory management. And we provided two ways how the stakeholder can articulate a business requirement or a business use case, right? So in the first example, if you guys reading through it, you can see. So what's the difference between those two options?
Specifics like field names.
Yeah, and why and Bill deserves a really good sticker. So we really need to provide that one. So why those details are not that ideal at this stage? It's not the real story. It doesn't allow you to kind of understand the whole picture. It doesn't allow you to wrap your head around what kind of the end game, what's the process behind it. And in the meantime, does stakeholder have a full and deep understanding of kind of architecture of the solution? It's not their responsibility. So I, as a stakeholder, may give all those recommendations. You need to use those folders. You need to use those fields. You need to go and really set up this process for me because I, as a stakeholder, need it. But in the meantime, here, internally in Creatio, we have this saying, trust your no-code team. Because your role as a stakeholder to articulate your business process, to articulate your success criteria and the expectations. And the no-code team should have a needed capability within the organization to come up with the right architecture. Otherwise, the stakeholder will be doing that architecture work for the no-code team, which is not their job. I'm not saying they're not good at it because you might have a stakeholder who really understands deeply what kind of capabilities is needed, but it's not their job. It's important, right? And what makes the second option a little bit, like not a little bit, but better, in our opinion, it gives the no-code team a much wider understanding and coverage of the workflow, success criteria, but also it gives you a room to maneuver and find the right go-live release set of capabilities. Because if you see in the first scenario, where I'm saying I need integration with CRM, Zoom Info, marketing automation, and LinkedIn, and this is it. Like, I really need those integrations. And it's been said as a statement that without that, I cannot go live. In the second example, I'm saying that I need that kind of data exchange. And I give a possibility for my no-code team to understand what type of data can be pulled in at the first step. Like those of you, like raise your hand if you've done implementations with financial services organizations, right? And typically, in your experience, how many integrations would you need to perform for like mid-size implementations for a bank or credit union or investment company? At least 2, it's a very minimum, but you can easily go up to 10, 20, etc. If you're working through this methodology and you get all those 20 integrations to be done immediately, what is the likelihood that you can do everyday delivery? Everyday delivery is 3 years from now, post-COVID 25th phase, right? So that's not how it works. Okay. So just to summarize. Trust your no-code team. Focus a stakeholder on providing you details on the business process, on the workflow, on the end goal, and allow for a room so that your no-code team can decide what will be that minimal viable product that will go live in a matter of days and weeks.
The other reason that you want to hold off getting too specific on, how different parts of the solution architecture are implemented is that you haven't gone through this next stage, which is all about trying to identify the right options you have for enabling it. So you might not even have to integrate with the system because, in fact, you're going to have another package that sits in front of it and that handles all the interactions with that system, right? So I guess the point being, let the process, follow the course. As Andy said, trust the no-code team and trust that the steps are in place to help identify and shape the architecture that's appropriate. This one, goes through and identifies possible options, right? This is sort of the classic buy versus build 2x2 that you saw in the keynote, with the third sort of new option being no-code, right? Which gives you, I think, the best of both worlds. No code by itself can be used to configure everything, or you can also use pre-built templates, pre-built apps, pre-built components that give you even more flexibility and more acceleration on top of the no-code platform. So, this is sort of a decision tree, right? And it is meant as a starting point. You may obviously customize it, but it's gives sort of the way that we think about trying to strike a balance between finding the right solution, but at the end of the day, not having 100 different parts, that are all glued together, right? And so it focuses on trying to base a solution on the no-code platform. So it does have, I think, a bias that the no-code platform should be used whenever it can be, right, as a consistent architecture. So starting at the top, right, the first question that we ask is, is it a well-defined, sort of standard use case where there's a market standard, there's pre-built accounting rules or there's pre-built functionality that can be bought, right? In which case, a package application may be the best fit. The ability, though, to customize a package application typically only goes so far. And at some point, I think everyone's had, the scenario where they have a project themselves or they've heard of a project where they've customized the application so much that it becomes impossible to maintain, right? Or it becomes impossible to upgrade. And so I think when you have those types of requirements that need lots of change or flexibility or customization, this is really, we believe, an ideal sweet spot for the no-code platform itself, right? Either, again, by itself, where you define the process, or there may be a pre-built application template, such as CRM, where you can layer that on top of the platform. But that gives the ability to change, customize it. You make it your own process, yet it's not with the same level of heavy lifting and effort associated with custom development. Last step then is for complex technical solutions, right? Maybe you're integrating with, or replacing a legacy system. It may be that there are certain very specific technology or transactional or scale requirements that require this to be custom built. Then, look at those as needed. We're not at all trying to assert that you shouldn't have custom development as part of your project. It's just it's one of a continuum of options. We talked about the fusion team model, and so when you need custom development, you can integrate those as part of the overall solution architecture. But try to do it only when needed, and make sure that when you do, that you have really a way to integrate it into the overall solution, right? So instead of building monolithic, sort of systems that then have to sort of be reconciled or integrated with each other, think about this much more of a composable architecture. We talked about Gartner's sort of composable enterprise view, which is really about building your enterprise sort of vision of your architecture on components that you can adapt, you can add, you can change. It is a more resilient style of architecture than buying monolithic applications. And so in this case, when you do need custom development, you can add those custom modules in or custom integrations in, but those are components on top of the overall low code or no code architecture.
And we have a few examples that we want to discuss with you. And that's where stickers will be flowing, right? Because there are lots of examples and lots of engagements needed. So imagine that you're doing a travel request management system. Which option you would go? Custom development, no? No custom development? Which way to go? No code. In which case you would use packaged application for travel request management? If you don't foresee, if it's super simple, super basic, you have an idea that in the 95% of all the cases, it fits what you need, and you don't expect to change it, and it's easy to get deployed. In that case, there are some packaged applications that you can use for that. If you expect your business process to evolve, to change, to add additional approvals, to add additional management kind of layers, that's where probably no code with some templates will be the best way to go. Now, landing workflow automation in financial services. The other way to say it is kind of loan origination system. So which way to go?
No code for financial services.
Why is that?
Because it's easy to configure and it's automable.
Correct. So you need expertise and you need to have ready-to-use capability because you don't want to recreate it from the scratch. You need objects and components such as application management, approvals, verifications, underwriting, all those kind of capabilities. In the meantime, if you work with financial services companies, they would tell you that in 9 out of 10 cases, lending processes in different companies would be different. Because they would have, specifically if we talk about business banking, they would have so many different variations, so many different options how to go with. That's the reason why no code with templates might be the best way to go. Now, a tool for sending massive.
They also have because of regulations, they have to change every.
Absolutely.
So they must have local capabilities to be able to.
They got a new compliance regulation like AML, and they completely need to rebuild the way how they go about it. That's a serious request for a sticker, Eric. We really, yeah. Or it's crazy how it's. was good. Okay.
And just one comment: a lot of the loan origination vendors that claim to have a package solution are really just workflow vendors, right? And when you look at what actually gets customized, it often bears no resemblance to their starting point from the application. So do you want to get that, or do you build on top of the no-code platform you already have and are building other apps on?
Okay. What about a tool for sending mass emails? Package application. Why?
Because it's the same. You need the tool, you don't need to
Yeah. Okay, unless you have a ready-to-use component, but then the question is, if this is the only thing you need, perhaps tool like MailChimp, etc., will be a good way to go. Now, trade compliance workflow automation. No codes with templates. Why?
Because there is something with the templates it's already existing. It's nearly the same most of the time, and then you have to adapt.
It also might need an integration with packaged build solutions, because in some cases there are certain compliance packages that would kind of connect to SDN, non-SDN databases, and they would perform needed checks. So it might be a combination of no-code platform with a template plus a needed integration and connector to give all those needed checks. Okay, accounting and budgeting. That's where you really want to get creative, right? It's a super, super creative job. So what would be the way to go here? Packaged application. Why? Low code. Yeah.
You need to do lots of integration and lots of post integration, BRB, accounting, warehouse.
Yeah. I would support idea, and there is no wrong and right answers, but I would personally support the idea of packaged application because there are so many standards. There is kind of standard and best practice, etc. It will take a lot of time to develop that, and perhaps not much sense, unless there is a very specific budget and process that is very different from the way how other companies operate. But that would be my opinion. Might be wrong. And then warranty case management in manufacturing industry. What would be the best way to go? No code. Why? Straightforward, pretty easy. But why not packaged application? Yes, Bill. Yeah. Yeah, warranty management will be very specific. There should be lots of different things like components, product catalogs, all those kind of things. So no code with a template might be an option because I've seen lots of customizations happening in this use case. Again, this is just to yes. SLA key, absolutely. That's a really, really sticker claim. Okay, we need to provide it, but that's a really good point. Okay, so let's move on to probably we'll skip this because we.
Yeah, that's fine. We've talked about that.
As we are discussing option analysis, one of the things that we really focus on from an investment point of view is marketplace. And you can see that we are bringing marketplace applications to our Studio product so that our customers can kind of get those recommendations. Having templates, having those best practices is super important, right? So we're working on AI-assisted development where Studio will be recommending you the right marketplace app to accelerate your time to deployment. Having this great combination of flexibility and ready-to-use capabilities is the way to go. And
there's also a role here for the COE, right? And so I think having the COE provide guidance on maybe what I'll call sort of an internal marketplace, right, is important because they will also have, beyond what is available in the public marketplace, their own set of components or integrations that they've built to deploy someplace inside the organization that might be available for use.
Mm-hmm. You probably already love our matrix, right? Where we have business complexity, governance complexity, and technical complexity. When you go through your design and prototyping stage, of course you want to use it.
Yeah, and one of the points that we made, we made it a few times, is this design and prototyping is all about looking broadly, right? So you're not going deep into any one area, but you're trying to cover a lot of the broadest possible thinking and vision. And so this is where the app matrix actually becomes super important, because it will help you size sort of the complexity, and it can help you determine, when you get into actually the next stage and you start to want to take this broad vision and start chunking it down into smaller bites of the apple, so to speak, and when you want to start defining the go live, like using the complexity will help determine how big or how narrow should things be. And so using this matrix during the design phase as a guidance is super important. So we talked about this a little bit, but I want to spend some more time on it. Traditionally, you think about getting user feedback way at the end of a project, right? And a lot of times you run into some rude awakenings of getting feedback. They love it, they hate it, things are confusing, it's difficult to use. And so the whole notion of pulling prototyping up much, much earlier and using it as a way to really ensure that you're getting the type of validation at the very beginning is super important. It's not just usability, that's a component of that, but you're also, you're validating the vision, you're validating alignment, right? That's again why the breadth of this is important, right? Because you need to use this as a way to work with a stakeholder to really align and validate, okay, is this what you meant? Or do we need to elaborate or extend parts of what we were prototyping in order to better capture the vision, right? So it's really about alignment. It's about getting that feedback early on in the process. It also allows you to take bold steps to ideate. I've seen cases where, again, because you could do this at very sort of cheap cost, because you're prototyping it and you can rapidly come up with a bunch of ideas, you're going to try a bunch of things out and test them. And if that isn't the right approach, or it hasn't captured exactly the spirit of what the business stakeholder has asked for, you can iterate and try more things out with less fear of failure.
How would you argue if business is telling you don't have time for all those cycles of going through testing, evaluation, and so on and so forth? Here are requirements, come back and
Yeah, it's what's the saying? You never have time to do it right, only time to do it again, or whatever. Yeah, I mean that's what will happen, right? Is if you don't have time now, you're going to go off, you're going to build it, and then you may be wildly off, and it may take 5x, 10x the cost of time that it would have taken to try to correct it. And by that point, it's too late. It gets harder and harder to change. So I think you have to sort of prove to them that this is actually a minimal investment of time, right? And being able to do sort of these very sort of short but frequent prototyping sort of validation stages is important, right? These are not massive, but they should be frequent, like bite-sized pieces of feedback that you're getting from these.
And you tell them to trust their no-code team, right? And when we think about prototyping, we think about a demo. So there is a lot of similarities between doing a prototype and doing a demo. What is also really important is that in the most of the cases, when you sell your business on a technology, you probably show some sort of a demo just to paint a vision. So we strongly encourage you to take those demos and use them for further prototyping. Because what a great demo engineer does, they don't create a full-blown solution, they don't do all the integrations, but they stay on this surface level to show all the needed steps within the process so that the business can capture that, right? So Paulina, for example, is a great demo engineer. She knows how to do that, and she does an incredible job with demos. And that's actually converts into nice conversations, because when you have 30 minutes or 40 minutes to see the product, you will not go into the details. But if you set up your data model, if you set up your UI, your workflow, and your integrations, not to the full extent, but to demonstrate how it's all connected, and it is also might be a demo of a broader solution, it should be a really good start to discuss that with your audience. And usually, people get really aggravated when the stakeholder starts saying, no, this is not good, this needs to be changed. That's where the thinking process flows. So you want that feedback. You want sometimes some kind of critique to be done by your stakeholder, because that's where you will discover things where you're not aligned. That's what helps you to shape out this vision. So what we are saying that instead of going and creating those documents, requirements, etc., start doing those advanced demos in a form of prototypes and start discussing the requirements using those demos as early as possible. So that's kind of the idea behind it. And actually, with that idea in mind, if you think about our new studio no-code designer, you will see that we have created the workflow of new application creation exactly based on this concept. You start with pages, so you are creating views, UX, UI. You are creating needed navigation items, data models, business process, integrations, and if needs be, get access to professional development tools. But that's kind of your workflow you go through to set up that prototype that you can start discussing with your business stakeholder as soon as possible. And as you're doing this prototype, don't forget about components. We discussed that composability and the ability to reuse needed functionality is super critical. Like when we were discussing those examples and the use cases, we always saying, look, it's a no-code use case, but it will be really great to have a template for that. And that's the reason why you will see in our application hub that we have decomposed all our capabilities into those composable elements that you can use to assemble your use case. You do a claim management process for an insurance company, you would probably want to pick cases, account records, claim record, and create your own workflow by reusing those components. So please use that in your process. I know that we're running a little bit out of time, so we'll probably finish the project assignment and we'll not go to the case study.
Okay. So last step, this is where you do explicitly transition. You've been thinking very broad. Now you want to start honing in on the MVP and go live. And so, as you start to decompose things into smaller cases, part of it is going to be based around trying to look for sort of fast, quick delivery. There may be a timeline going back to your business use case that your business stakeholder has identified as important. It has to be aligned with some important milestone in the business, or it has to enable some other change they're making. And so there's both a view of sort of scope decomposition, there's a view of timeline decomposition, and then there's going through, and we spent a fair amount of time earlier talking through the application matrix. We have a full session on it. But the matrix is really meant to be a key sort of framework that you use during this stage. It gets used in a number of stages, but this stage in particular depends heavily on it because it allows you to sort of set the slider bar, if you will, on business, governance, and technical complexity to then help zone in on what style of delivery model is appropriate, right? Is this something where the business team themselves can deliver it and they have the skills needed? Do you enlist the COE because of the business or the governance complexity, or do you need technical expertise? You're going to create a fusion team, and this is also linked to we haven't had time to go through this, but this will be linked to actually there will be a full chapter in the book that talks about roles and which roles are important inside each of these organizations, and that's also important because one of the outcomes here is that you've not only set the delivery model, but you've formed the participants in your project team, right? You've set the resources, you've set the plan, you've given them everything they need in terms of the skill sets, the organizational model, the governance model to be successful. And then the last step here is around also sizing the environments. And that will, again, vary depending on the delivery model. For simple, apps that are business delivered, that may only need one environment or two environments. The more complex you get, the more testing environments and production mirrors you may need. And so there will be guidance here that also helps you size the necessary environments that you'll use then when you enter into the actual construction.
Okay, so we'll probably skip this part. We have spoken about that, and very quickly, so we've discussed this territory management. I will not go into the details, but I wanted just to illustrate the end result of this app that we've built, and we've built this app in a couple of weeks, really. So the first prototype has taken us probably a few days, and that's the kind of the account management page with all the insights and integration, and then you also see news and scoops where we will be able to pull in alerts and some information on accounts. So we can showcase this app in greater details, but that's a result of going through this process and being able to fully launch the solution for more than 100 users now in a really short period of time. Okay? So that was the design phase. Thank you so much for being such an incredible audience. Just to remind you, we'll have 3 more sections on the Playbook, Go Live, Everyday Delivery, and Application Metrics. But it doesn't mean that we stop now, because the next presentation will be a presentation of that case that Catherine was presenting on the stage, Israeli government. And we have Oren from Proceed, who will be sharing examples and details on this case with us. So stay tuned. That will be our next session.